Well, hello, everybody, and welcome to the Pixel Classroom Podcast. Of course, I'm your host, Ryan Reed, and this is the big 200th episode. I want to thank everybody who has supported the podcast the last, hardly 5.5 years. I was actually just talking to our first guest and everything, and he's saying good luck, and he's also looking forward to listening to. So for the 200th episode, all my anniversaries, I always save a really big one here, too, and this is somebody who has really inspired me. I discovered his work about a year ago. It really changed my classroom here and everything else here. But he is the author of Building the Thinking Classrooms, which is used little here. He's joining me today. And thank you so much for doing this. But I'd like to welcome the one and only Dr. Peter Liljedahl to the Pixel Classroom. Peter, thank you so much for being with us today.
Thanks for having me, Ryan. I didn't know this was the 200th episode.
Congrats. Yeah, this. Thank you. Yeah, I can't believe, because the average podcast doesn't last more than 8 episodes these days. It's hard to believe.
Yeah, well done.
Oh, thank you so much. So, Peter, for those who are listening either on the audio or watching us on the live stream, and I think there are about 5 people right now, including a couple principals. Introduce who you are, what led to the Building Thinking Classrooms, and we're, as I'm saying here, we got about 3 different books here, and I have all of them. So, what has been your career, your love for math, and what has led to the design and building of the Thinking Classrooms?
So currently I'm a professor of math education at Simon Fraser University in Vancouver, Canada. Prior to that, I've been a professor there for about 21 years. Prior to that, I was a high school math teacher in the Vancouver School District, which is only partially true because I also taught physics and English composition, but math was my passion. It was what I was trained to do. It's what my degree was in. And high school for me back then was grade 8 through 12. For the last 25 years, I've been K to 12. So I spend an awful lot of time in middle school classrooms and elementary school classrooms as well. I'm not the kind of professor who stays in my office and does research just on campus. I am in classrooms all the time. In fact, I'm going to be in a middle school classroom tomorrow. And I was in classrooms last week. So I am in classrooms all the time, over 230 in the last 2 years.
Wow, that's amazing. I mean, 200 episodes, you're in like 230 classrooms. I mean, I'm like saying I keep my one class with my, set of 20 to 25-year-old, 25 students in middle school here, but that's absolutely amazing. And the fact you're going to be in middle school here too, which is, hitting us all up the same alley here. So, and then I like the fact is, I have to say my best professors I remember in college were the ones who actually did not stay in their office. They actually interviewed, they talked with their students, they actually spent that time. Because the old story, and you can tell me if this is true or not, they always said that a lot of professors do a lot of writing, but the ones that are really amazing are the ones that want to talk and actually interact with their students and actually go to the classroom.
Well, I can't speak for my colleagues on that. I can speak for myself. I know I'm much more effective as a professor the more I am in classrooms working with real kids, because my subject of study and the students I work with at the university are destined to become teachers. So I got to know what it's like on the front lines. I gotta walk the talk.
Yeah, and I have to say, you said yourself, your passion's has been about math, and I have to say, as a robotics and STEM and a CTE teacher, I have definitely worked a lot with the mathematics in me. But one thing is always keeping, is always making it so it's engaging, and also the fact how relevant it is to my classes. I mean, I know that led to a little bit of your creation of the Building the Thinking Classrooms, but what really did lead to the inspiration of it? I mean, I've read your story, I've watched various videos, even I think there was a TED Talk in there somewhere too. What really inspired the Thinking Classrooms and its, what it's transformed into?
Well, there's a long story and a short story, but the short story is basically, it was while I was doing my doctoral studies, and I had the good fortune of spending several days in a middle school classroom trying to help a teacher implement problem solving. That was sort of my passion at the time, was how to get problem solving into the classroom, and it being met with just abysmal failure, right? Like it was just not working. And then spending more time in that classroom, just watching kind of what the status quo was, and coming to this epiphany that students are spending an awful lot of time in their classrooms not thinking. And this is a problem because if students are not thinking, they're not learning, period.
Right.
And thinking is a necessary precursor to learning. And I was seeing a lot of not thinking. And that led to the first study, which was visiting 40 different classrooms in 40 different schools to see if this was true elsewhere as well. And it turned out it was true everywhere I went, that up to 80% of students were doing no thinking whatsoever, at least not the kind of thinking they need to do to continue to be successful in mathematics, which then in turn led to building thinking classrooms, which has been a lifelong project on trying to figure out how do we change things in classrooms so that students can start to think, right? And it's predicated on a couple of realities. One reality, as mentioned, students are not thinking. Another reality is that much of what happens in classrooms today is unchanged in the last 170 years. It's still built on that framework of that post-industrial revolution method of teaching that emerged about 170 years ago, and that these institutionally normative structures are potentially turned out to be actually creating an environment that is not conducive to thinking. So it's about how do we change this environment to get students to think, and that's what I've been working on.
And that was something that got to me too when I discovered the book and I was looking at my classrooms. As I had an approach from my instructional coach and my admin at the time saying, "Well, Ryan, are your students thinking?" And I said, "Well, yes, I know they're thinking in this aspect, but they were asking me like, are they thinking in general, like why it's this or what is the question?" And I said, "That's a really good point, and I'm not sure because I've been doing this 15 years. I mean, I've been an instructional coach to a director of technology to a classroom teacher. And it was so funny as both the CTE and now later as a robotics and even a STEM teacher, it kind of looked at me like, you're right. Are they thinking it? And that's what really kind of got me to doing that with the pieces. Because I had done I did select like playing cards, like your book too. But it was really interesting when I did the switch and I actually went out, I bought a bunch of like whiteboard pieces. I had a classroom. I put the whiteboards as they made sections. I would have them do cards. I put the area that I have them go to, and I would give them a question of what we were studying to. And I kind of started off small because I'm not a math teacher, but I worked a lot of digital literacy and web page design, which does require mathematics. So we really had to look into that area. So I'd do a question, or I'd start with a brief thing like, let's do a Frayer card, guys. You all know Frayer cards. That helps you get the thinking. And they would put the subject, and then I would actually have them pass around the word. But then I would get a little bit more higher thinking, like, all right, guys, web page design. Here is the picture of this web page. Here's another web page. Everybody had a different thing here. What is the HTML code? What is the size for this header? What should it be? And they really had to think that. And I set the timer and I would do it in a couple of minutes and say, okay, switch to the next person. So, but it really got them thinking about their designs. And as time went on, I saw more of the difference. Like it wasn't immediately, but they started taking more care with the designs. They started thinking it, and I saw the grades go up. I saw the engagement go up. It was very transformable.
Yeah. And it's like even in something as engaging as coding or website design or robotics, the kids are still, they've been encultured into a much more passive role than education actually needs for them to be in. And what you were doing there was you were getting them to be active. And in fact, things like syntax when it comes to coding is a perfect example of how we can get students to think. Like, we don't really need to teach syntax. We just need to give kids examples of syntax and what the outputs are, and they will figure out what the syntax is.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. Like I did an area too where I did one of my business classes and we talked about, what is the process? And I gave them a couple of like pieces like, balance this budget, where is he short? Where is he too much? Where did he spend too much money? But then I said, I'm going to throw a little something into you in about 5 minutes. So I want you to go to the group, do the 1 minute part. And then I would do there. I was like, that's great. But now you're going to the movie theaters in an hour. You just got called from your mom and your aunt's coming to town. You're going to join them from dinner. And they said, hey, it's her birthday Friday. Why don't you pick her up a gift for $10 or something? And they had to think about that. Like, oh, you've thrown kind of a new angle to this. Like, what do I do? And they would discuss it as a group. And that's what I like to discuss it as a group. Because like, hey, if it was my aunt, I would do X, Y, and Z. Or, well, that's not a problem for me. I'm always working. I've already got an extra $30. I'm good. Or, oh, wow, yeah, I am going to the movies and I don't get paid until Friday. What would I do? It was a very way to get that engagement.
Yeah. So it's really about getting them to think. And one of the things that we found in our research was the task is not enough, right? The task is necessary. And we've been talking about tasks up until now. But yeah, if we want students to think, we got to give them something to think about. And that comes in the form of a task. But once we're past that, then what happens, right? Like if we're asking them to think while embedded in an environment that looks like every other environment that they've been in where thinking was not required, the students are going to resist this. It doesn't feel natural to them because they are trying to accustom themselves to the game that's being played in the classroom. Everything about this classroom is saying play the game a certain way. That's sort of I do, we do, you do way. Mm-hmm. And now you're asking me to think, and they're going to have questions because you haven't shown them how to do it yet. But what if we completely and radically transform the environment at the same time, right? Like what if instead of having them sitting in their desk, we get them to stand up and work at a vertical whiteboard? What if instead of working in the groups that they've been with all week or selecting the groups that they want to be in, we randomly select them into groups and so on. And these are things that radically transform the environment. And it creates a space that is not only more conducive to thinking, but actually allows them to be different. Because if we ask them to be different in an environment that is the same, they're not going to be different. But now we're asking them to be different in a different environment, and all of a sudden they're different. They start to think, they engage, they take risks, they're willing to try things without being told how to do it. They deal with complexity and adversity, they develop perseverance. Like all of these things are emerging when we start changing the environment.
Yeah, and one of my science teachers also adapted this in my previous district where he had that. And when he put into that where they worked with groups they didn't really work with instead of their friends, or I'm always with Katie, I'm always with Joel, they started kind of looking at both their strengths and weaknesses, but they also saw where they would engage more. And the teacher, shout out to Nick there, but he himself noticed the difference. It wasn't just about getting them up, which he did. He was always about get them on the board, get them on there. Don't have them behind the Chromebook all the time, or don't do a worksheet every 5 minutes and then, hey, in 15 minutes, let's share our answers. He wanted to get them going and doing that interactive. And he found a way to actually, because he taught biology and physics, but he took some of the areas like, okay, we're going to do the s'mores experiment. What do we need to do the 5? But he said, I want us to go outside and I want you to go do this. And I want you to go do that. And then he would do the random selection, had them in the groups and say, okay, what were the factors different from where you do? And he's like, hey, I didn't have that same factor. I was by the side of the school and the wind was blowing. It was always out. Well, I was in the sun. It was fine. He really got them to thinking, but also bringing their different point of views as well as their different experiences to that same lesson. Absolutely. When it was really about cooking s'mores on a solar oven, but he really brought that out.
But he wasn't micromanaging every aspect of that, and that's really what another part of building thinking classrooms is about: is decentering ourselves, giving up some of that control to the students, creating an autonomy that they have to seize, right? And not any autonomy, like they can't be wild, but to give up some of that control, create autonomy within the students so that they can start to take more responsibility for their learning. But there's 14 things in building thinking classrooms that we need to work on, and autonomy is one of them. Thinking tasks is another, random groups is another, vertical whiteboards is another, right?
Yeah, and it's like when I would work with the notes, I would take pictures with my phone and I would upload it to a shared folder so they could look at their notes too. And that was always interesting too. I know one of my coworkers, when she was doing it, they would do their notes, and she was a traditional math teacher. So she really was able to do the boards and the selection, but she looked about how to keep the notes, because then she'd realize a couple days later, hey, did they remember exactly how did that square root actually form? What was the formula on that too? I mean, the sections are both amazing how you break them down as well as how they use this. And as a teacher who's probably listening to this or is thinking, I'm thinking of reading this book, I'm thinking of doing this for class. What do you think is the best way to go through each of those strategies, like in a like a very brief part here? As you said, the vertical, we talked about the group.
All right.
So I talked about notes. Yeah.
So you mentioned that there are 3 books. There are 3 books.
Yeah.
They're loosely referred to as the orange book, the blue book, and the green book.
Which I'm trying to share on my computer here for our video people, if it wants to work.
So the orange book is the first book. Yes, the orange book is the first book, and it's called Building Thinking Classrooms, and it is 14 chapters. Each chapter is a way to start to transform your space so that students can start to think. It starts with 3 practices: thinking tasks, random groups, vertical whiteboards. That's what we refer to as the first toolkit. You do all 3 of those at once. You don't do one at a time. You do all 3 of those at once. And then when that's up and running, and it takes about a week or 2, you move to the next toolkit. The next toolkit has 5 practices, and so on. And all that is explained in chapter 15 of the Orange Book. The Orange Book is, you have to think about the Orange Book as developmental. Okay. It's called Building Thinking Classrooms. It's not called Shazam. You have a thinking classroom. Right? You have to build it. And when I say it's developmental for both the teacher and the students. Because when we try to make change in our classroom, one of the things we have to understand is that real change does not happen without the permission of the students, right? Like, we can do lots of different things, but if the students resist, and they're the biggest stakeholders in the game, and if they resist hard enough, it is impossible for you to sustain it. It's impossible for you to continue growing in that direction. So it's developmental for both you and the students, right? So you start to build a thinking classrooms by picking a thinking task, random groups, and vertical surfaces. Well, it turns out this is highly engaging for kids. So then they respond by behaving different. And then once that's up and running, you can take the next step, which is into the second toolkit, the next 5 practices. There you do them one at a time, and the order doesn't matter, but you can start by defronting your classroom. They respond to that. You can start thinking about how you're going to not respond to some of their questions. They respond to that, right? You can start to think about how you're going to launch your task. They respond to that. At each stage, you're growing and they're growing, right? And this is called Building Thinking Classrooms. Then there's the Green Book. Now, the Green Book was the latest book that was written, and it's kind of assuming that you already have a thinking classroom. It helps you if you haven't done it yet a little bit, but now that you have a thinking classroom, what would a lesson look like, right? And then it gives you this idea of what lessons would look like, and there's a forthcoming red book that is for grades 6 to 12. But for those teachers who are thinking about reading this, start with the Orange Book. Read the Orange Book. Use that as your developmental framework for starting to build a thinking classroom. Then once it's built, go to the Green Book. The Blue Book is for if you teach in an atypical setting, right? Like if you're teaching online or small classes, you're homeschooling, you're working in a resource room, you're working in these sort of settings that are a little different than your typical enrolling teacher in a brick and mortar school, right? So it's not modifying for like language arts or social studies. That book will eventually come, but this is about modifying what you've learned in the Orange Book to fit into some of these, different and important areas of education that exist out there.
Yeah, and I have to say, because when I went to my current middle school, it was a resource room because it was part of the library. The good news is our tables, like flex seating, were whiteboards. We could flip them up. We could actually have it here. I could shift the students around because I'd always have the students there, but some of them would always sit in a different area. So when we would do a thinking classrooms, looking at our coding, maybe looking at what is a website or our little robotics pieces, it was amazing when they'd come. And I had a student in 6th grade just this last trimester where we were going over the different coding to make a book trailer. They had to read a book. They were reading a book. We had to make an actual trailer for our library to engage other readers with our librarian. And one of them was like, "Oh, what was the command to do this?" And she went like, "Oh, let me have the marker. It's this one." And then you got to snap it here. And he said, "Oh, but you can create a bug if you put this code wrong." It was really nice, but the modification worked very well to that, even though it wasn't a traditional, brick and mortars classroom. Where I didn't see that in the high school when we did something similar with our different robots at the time too. Versus what I did see with that modification when I redone my room. And like I said, the biggest challenge over for me is, like you said, getting rid of that front of the classroom. Because sadly to say, like my resource room, there's a front, but it's not really a front. So that works good. While when I was in my high school room, it's like, no, this is the front of the room. And it's a little hard not to say that is the front of the room, even though it's designed in a different area.
So defronting the classroom, which is practice number 4, chapter 4 in the Orange Book. So defronting is about trying to break through the normative structures of the classroom that are communicating to kids how they should behave. right? Like one of the things that happened in our research, we found that whenever we went into these uber organized classrooms, you know, the ones where all the desks are in perfect rows,
Oh yeah.
everything's color coded. There's an inbox and an outbox for everything and a border around the bulletin board. Every time we went into those classrooms, we had a tougher time getting students to think, right? And when we showed students photographs of those types of classrooms and asked them questions, and the key question was, what do you think this teacher expects? What the students would say is that this teacher expects perfection. And this is problematic because thinking is messy. And when students feel that the expectation is perfection, they don't feel safe to think. So how do we break away from that sense that this teacher expects perfection? And what we landed on was that one of the ways to do that is to defront the classroom. So there are 4 things that front the classroom, okay? Where the teacher's desk is, where the projector screen is, where the teacher stands, and which way the students' desks are facing. And if you can picture a really like a traditional classroom that you would see in the movies and so on, and maybe even in your school, where the projector screen's at the front, the teacher's desk at the front, the teacher stands at the front, all the desks face the front, there's a heavily fronted classroom, and it communicates to students a certain expectation. But we don't have to get rid of those 4 things. We don't have to get rid of the projector screen or the teacher's desk. The teacher has to stand somewhere and the desks have to face somewhere. But if we can disrupt this in such a way that those 4 things are distributed around the room, then the room becomes defronted. The fronting happens when these 4 things congregate. But if we can disperse them, then the room becomes defronted. We don't get rid of them. And once we've done that, we can still have our color-coded inboxes and outboxes and our borders and all of those little things that make teachers happy. But now what this room is communicating to kids is this is a place where we get messy. This is a place where we roll up our sleeves. We do some work. It doesn't have to be perfect, but we're working towards it.
I think it's a great advice because, like I said, I've learned why. I've always been known as an organized person, even though I don't know why. For some reason, I do that little pieces. But when people have come into my classroom, they're always like, "Well, was that there and what's that there too?" Is like, well, I found out that works better for them to work with each other as well as work with the styles for the lesson plans and everything. Because like I said, sometimes you can't control the room. Like my current room, it's designed like, yeah, we have one desk here, we have one here, we have flex, we have here, yeah, there's a screen. But at the same time, the students are kind of like, yeah, but there's no real front of the room. Yes, there's windows and Dr. Reed talks over here. But
like we don't have control sometimes. We go into a science room, everything is bolted down. The projector and the desk are at the front. But then when those get turned on, don't stand at the front.
Mm-hmm.
Right? And you can have students sitting on both sides, and maybe you're sharing a classroom with another teacher and they want the student's desk to be a certain way. Well, guess what? Furniture moves, and it moves every day. So you can have your students defront the classroom at the beginning of the lesson and then refront it at the end of the lesson. We do that all the time when I go into classrooms. So it's, we have way more control of the classroom than we think we do. We just tend to fall into these normative structures ourselves because that's how we were taught. That's how we've been teaching for a long time. That's where we find comfort, right? Interesting piece of data, when we showed students those classrooms that were those sort of Pinterest ready classrooms, close to 100% of kids said this teacher expects perfection, but there was 15% of kids who said, oh, I want to be in that classroom. Fast forward 20 years, there's your future teacher, right? So we're designing the kinds of classrooms that we liked to be in. That doesn't mean that they're good for learning. And the next thing we have to ask ourselves, are we designing the classroom for teaching or are we designing it for learning? Because they're not the same thing.
Yeah, I think that's a great point too. I mean, because like I said, it is. I mean, yes, we want to do. I remember I had this one coworker. I loved her classroom. I felt it was like old thing. She had all this display work. The students were always up and going, moving around. They weren't sitting down. And I said, I'd love to be in her classroom. And then I tried to be like her classroom, and I found out that disengaged the students. And then as a teacher, it frustrated me because they're not engaged. I'm not working my lesson, and it just didn't work. Because I'm known as, they go, people look at me like, Ryan never stands still in his classroom. If he stands still, it's because he's really got to show something to the kids that they have to see. Otherwise, he's over here 2 seconds. He's over here. He's over in the room. He's chatting with 5 other students like, oh, tell me what you're working on, or oh, how did you do that? So it's like, I never had that problem, but I've also looked at where I've tried to make this, beautiful, organized, as you said, Pinterest classroom, or try to repeat something another teachers did. It doesn't work out, and it does disengage the students. They might like and say, hey, this looks like so-and-so's classroom, but it's not the same classroom. It's just, it's a mirror.
Right. Like, building thinking classrooms is a framework, right? The research tells us what, by and large, is the best practices to use, and it's been tested in hundreds of contexts, right? So but it still has to be you, right? You can't be somebody else. It still has to work with you. So it's a framework. The expectation is that you take it and then you make it your own. And I can go into 2 different classrooms in a day, and they'll look very different. They'll both be thinking classrooms, and they'll be very different.
I mean, it is. I mean, it's like, even just talking to you, it's like thinking of the things I've done right. There's also some more stuff I want to go into as myself as a teacher, especially going forward, because I'm going to be bringing more of that into my school district I'll be going to in the fall, and a lot of the areas too. If and that's something too. It's like, teachers who are have been doing this a while and everything, and the mod thing. Do you feel that it is always good to double check the framework, and then, like, maybe in my cases, sometimes I review your books and say, oh yeah, I haven't been doing that enough. Maybe I need to look at that chapter versus, like, I have this kind of down pat, and I have had 6 different classrooms and it's working, but where am I struggling here? Like I said, the note taking, or maybe, like you said, how do I modify it to actually make it a full lesson, get beyond those tasks?
So there's a saying, right? When the student is ready, the teacher will appear. So the first time you sat down and read the book, you were ready for some of those things. You weren't ready for other things. Right? And you weren't ready, not because you weren't open-minded, but because you hadn't implemented some of those things while you were reading about other things, right? Like, you're reading chapter 5, but you haven't implemented 1 through 3. So there are things in there that you're only picturing based on what your imagination of what this looks like is. So I always tell teachers, after you've been implementing for a while, go back, read the book. You're going to find more things, not just things in the chapters you haven't done yet. You're going to find things in the chapters you have done. And there's so many times that it happens that a teacher says, so I had so many questions for you. I was implementing, I was having trouble with this, and I was having trouble with that, and this wasn't working. And then I went back and I read that chapter, and all the answers were there. I just hadn't seen them the first time. So yeah, reread the book. I'm not saying all the answers are there, but what I am saying is you will see more the second time around, because you are a different person the second time around. Right. And building thinking classrooms is like, my metaphor is like peeling an onion, right? Like, you're peeling back these layers that are 170 years old in the institutional setting, but they could be 20 years old in your teaching setting, right? Mm-hmm. And you got to peel back those layers, reinvestigate. How did it go? What else could I do? Now I'm ready to move into the next one, And I may be moving in and having trouble. Reread the book. There it is. That was a key that I missed. Right. And then, but there's more stuff. It's always evolving. There's new things in the green book that weren't in the orange book. There's going to be things in other podcasts that we've talked about explicitly, for example, the notes, that have evolved. And so, you're going to go, I'm doing everything that the orange book says. I know I'm doing it. Still, it feels like it can be better. Oh, I read the green book. There's the version 2.0, and then it gets better. Right. So it's always evolving. It's evolving for me. It's evolving for everybody.
And it is. I mean, I did look over the book myself when I was getting ready to teach it to the middle school. I was like, I need to look over chapters 1 and 2 again. It's like, okay, I got that. Maybe I need to think, but it's like, well, I'm not here. And it's like, and maybe I need to expose them a little bit more here for what this was in chapters 5 and 6. But then I need to kind of go back and go ready over that, and we're not ready for chapter 7, or this is a younger grade class. It might work in Mrs. Schultz's room because she's gotten that thing. She's gone back to chapters 4 and 8 several times, and she's fixed it, no problem. And at times like that, I even go to her and say, hey, please, Julie, just tell me, what I did this. It's not working. Granted, we're 2 different subjects, but how is it working for you? Because I peered by the other day walking by and said, you were doing a great job. And somehow I'm not hitting that buzz, and she might say, go back to this page. And I'm like, that maybe that's what I'm
Right.
missing.
But, and you're not just talking about yourself, you're still talking about the kids because they've had a different journey with you than they have with her. Right. So
Mm-hmm.
they're not developmentally in the same position that her students are in. So the same thing that she's doing may not work on them yet because they haven't grown to that level
Right.
yet. Right. So it's a journey. And then, you know, you get everything figured out and then they change the kids on you and then you got to start over. Except you don't really start over because now you have grown so much more. So you can start stronger and then the kids will develop faster because you are sort of, you know, exactly the path that you're charting for them and so on. But always accept the fact that it's never going to be perfect. The second time you do something is way better than the first, but not nearly as good as the third. And that we get to become better as teachers and they become better as learners through the imperfections of trying things, right? We learn from our mistakes. And I know that's sort of cliche, but if you were to ask me what is the number one quality of a teacher, it is the willingness to try something and make mistakes in front of their students. Because if you're willing to do that, you are definitely going to keep growing as a teacher.
And it's something that I think it's something that's into in my own students and I can do this across several different classrooms over the last several years, but I feel like, oh, that didn't work, or, you know, that was working a half an hour ago. I don't know why it's not working here. Let's move on and do that. And the kids look at me like, is he admitting he made a mistake, or is he admitting something's like completely gone out the door and he's kind of just reiterating? And I think it's always funny and I get told by other coworkers, like, you're somebody like the school could all of a sudden have an earthquake. But you still got to teach the lesson, and you would find a way to make that earthquake part of that lesson and still make it relevant. And I said, I think it's because I try to adapt, but at the same time, as I've had enough things go wrong, and the fact that I do make these mistakes, I think the students do see that he's willing to make a mistake, but he's willing to keep learning. Maybe I can keep learning too.
Yeah.
And that's when I love it when I see it. Even my most low end students, when I see them make that breakthrough and they've done that, it's like, that's exactly it right there. You found a way and everything, and hopefully they can continue growing there. It might be slow growth, but they get there. And that's one thing I always with me is I always enjoy that journey for them. And sometimes it might be an entire, like I said, I have a trimester. All of a sudden they get those last 2 days of school and you're like, oh, and I got to go start all over again, but maybe I'll try this a little better. Maybe I'll have a better growth or a better journey.
Absolutely.
This next group.
Yeah. And that's the right attitude to go with, right? Always just go back and figure out what can I do different? What can I do better? And the book gives you a lot of ideas, but that doesn't mean that your ideas are invalid, right? You still have ideas. You still bring your little flair to it. We call those micro moves. And often those micro moves will just make it so much better.
Yeah, and I have to say, and I'm going to just from personal, I'll try not to choke up, Peter, and this is one thing I think, but yeah, I have to say, when I found out about building thinking classrooms over a year ago, and like I said, I'm still growing, I'm hoping to do it much more going forward. I haven't done as much as I wanted to, but it's been good. But I do want to thank you because it did inspire me, because I was at a very low end feeling, maybe I need to get out of the classroom, maybe it's just that time for the move on. And I realized as I was on that journey, and same thing with the students on all ends of the spectrum, they were with me in that journey too. And a lot of them were seeing it, but then they were like seeing it in other ones, like you said, too. Because like I said, I had 3 other teachers that did it, but it looked different versus that mine. But also we're different subjects, physical science, biology, yes, more math in there, but also a different area versus somebody who's a CTE. Yes, here's this math, here's this design, here's coding. And then I would throw it into marketing, like, here's what you got to market. Give me the 4 P's of marketing. This is thing, go. And I said, each one of you get one of the 4 P's. We're in a group of 4. I'm like, okay. I'm going to randomize it. Your place, your product, your place. All right, go. I want to see you. How are you selling me this little, paper clip? Why should I buy your paper clip versus Walmart's paper clip? And it got going. And it was interesting because then they had to share with the other group. And I had a couple students go, I didn't think of that. That's a great idea. Why didn't I think of that when I was doing it? Because I had product too. And like, wait a second, what do I do? But it was good seeing that and everything else. So I want to thank you for inspiring me. And like I said, I'm continuing to learn. Like I said, I've been going back to the book. I'll be going probably more, be my summer reading along with some other ones. But I do want to thank you for it. I know it's been a long one, but I also I can't remember where, but I read, like you said, those little micros, little pieces is, it's a journey. It's not a race. And it's, as they say, it's not a finish line. It's a journey.
Absolutely.
Well, and on that too, because like I said, I want to respect your time. Peter, people who are thinking of getting into building thinking class, like you said, start with the orange book, and like I said, the green book, and then we have the blue book too. For a teacher that's heard of it, it's like I haven't quite pulled the trigger, but I really would like to try this next year, or I think I might just try this with one of my class. What would be probably the best advice when they're going ahead and jumping into this?
Okay, so I'm going to give you two pieces of advice, right?
Okay.
One, if you haven't read anything, start reading something. Okay. Listen to podcasts, do your homework. Okay. That's advice number one. Advice number two, we have a saying in Canada. And the saying is that the best time to plant a tree is 20 years ago. The second best time to plant a tree is today. I know that as teachers, we want to save up our learning at this time of the year and going like, oh yeah, start of the school year is going to be awesome. August, September, whenever you go back to school, I'm going to start strong. But the reality is, if you don't know what you want it to look like, you're not going to have a strong start, right? This is the time to start. I know we believe that kids are more malleable at the beginning of the school year. They are, and they're more accepting of new norms. They are. But they're also quite malleable at this time of the year because they've kind of checked out. They've maybe written their state exams already. They're just coasting for that last few weeks. They're not really super motivated to have that sort of intensity to their learning that they've had the rest of the year. They're pretty flexible and pretty open. And this is the time for you to play with it, not with the expectation that it's going to be fabulous and not with the expectation that you're going to get it right, but with the expectation that you're going to figure it out so that when the start of the school year comes, you've already fought all your battles, you've figured out the details, you've slayed your dragons, you got yourself organized. Now you're ready to start. Don't wait till the start of the school year. Start now. This is the best time to do it.
Yeah. Wow. I think that's the best mic drop right there too, because I agree. I mean, I'm about to do a couple things this week, and there's some new stuff we're doing it. Yes, we got 3 weeks with my 1 to 8th graders, and school year's coming over. It's like we're going to start this, and it's going to be awesome. And going forward to where I'm going back from middle to high school, I've already started thinking of ideas. I've already thinking stuff, and I'm like, I'm ready to go with that. But at the same time, I'm starting now. So was that we go here? It will be. And am I expecting to be a mess? Yes, I'm in a whole new school. I'm with the whole time. Granted, I'm going to be reunited with some old friends and some old coworkers, including one of my former mentors, but it's a different school. It's a different set of students. It's a different age range. It's going to be a different, piece in general. But I'm looking forward to it, and I'm hoping they're going to come with me, because I think of something my instructional coach always tells me is just say, go to the students and say, I believe in you. I see you. Let's make mistakes together. So that's the best I can say on that one.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's the mic drop moment right there.
Oh, thank you. It's like kind of a little inspiration, having a little star moment here. So everybody who wants to check out for Thinking Classrooms, I'll have in the show notes, buildingthinkingclassrooms.com. Peter, what do you have coming up that maybe people can try? I mean, like you said, we're heading to the end of the school year. Is there any conferences or anything or any things we've got coming up for you?
So there's a lot of exciting things coming up. On the Building Thinking Classrooms website, which I saw you scrolling earlier, there's an event page, and there's lots of little events happening. San Antonio and Scottsdale, I got some stuff going on with Carnegie Learning. I got something else going on in Scottsdale with Magma Math. And these are both coming up, all three are coming up in the summer. There's an open workshop in Jacksonville, Florida, where you can sign up. And again, that's going to be on the event page soon. It's not there yet. And then there is the Building Thinking Classroom Conference in Seattle at the end of June, beginning of July, but that one is sold out. And we have a Teacher and Coaching Institute in Sacramento this summer, but that again is also sold out. But those are just indicators that keep your eye on that, because it's going to happen again next summer. There's always something on the go. And of course, I'm going to be at NCSM and NCTM in the fall. and doing lots of sessions there.
Yeah, I'm hoping to be coming to one of these in a sense, which is funny. I'm originally from Santa Monica. I was born in Santa Monica, so they have that. And I'm actually going to be in Jacksonville, Florida, shortly after the school year is over. I think I'm just going to miss that. So, but yeah, I mean, amazing events, guys. Check out things and everything else. Peter, thank you so much for doing this. Thank you for your time. Thank you for building Think Classroom, your entire team, everybody you've worked with. This is amazing, and I'm looking forward to continuing the journey here. So, thank you so much for all of this.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me. And congratulations on the 200th show.
Thank you. It's hard to believe it's 200 and everything else. And, this all came together. I was having some tech issues and some other things before we got on the air here. For those watching the live stream, those who listen to the audio recording, thank you for being here. I hope you've enjoyed this journey as well. And we'll continue this journey as Peter said, check out podcasts. I know I check out mine. I'm always reading books. It's not just my last name. I do like to read books, but it's a wonderful time. So thank you so much for everything, Peter. Good luck and everything else, future endeavors. Also looking forward to all the amazing educators that are going to come talk to you at all these conferences and those who want to reach out like me. And thank you so much once again for being on today.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.
All right, and everybody else, like and subscribe if you like this for the podcast and everything else. And the show notes will be for Building Thinking Classrooms, and check out the events page on the website, and you can learn more that way. And everybody else, thank you for joining us on the Pixel